The night Jack disappeared, everything seemed normal. He was supposed to meet his friends, Sam, Claire, and David, at their usual spot, an old diner on the edge of town. But Jack never showed up. At first, they weren't worried. Maybe he was running late, or maybe he got caught up in something. They sent him texts, called him, nothing. His phone rang, but he didn't answer. Claire joked that he'd probably fallen asleep watching horror movies again, like he always did. But when they went to his apartment, things got strange. His car was still parked outside. His lights were on. His door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked fine, until they saw his phone on the kitchen counter. The screen was cracked, as if it had been dropped in a hurry. The strangest part? There was a voice message waiting in his inbox. It was from Jack. They played it. Static. Then, Jack's voice, frantic, whispering. "Understood, it's here. It's watching. I shouldn't have." A long pause. Heavy breathing. And then a sound. Low, wet, and inhuman. A noise that didn't belong to Jack or anything human at all. The message cut off. Silence filled the apartment. Claire covered her mouth. David backed away from the phone as if it would reach out and grab him. Sam swallowed hard and whispered, "What the hell was that?" Then, from somewhere deep inside the apartment, they heard it. A slow, deliberate creak, like a footstep on an old wooden floor. But Jack didn't have wooden floors, and he was nowhere to be found. Sam motioned for them to stay close as they followed the sound. Their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. Each breath they took felt like it might shatter the hush that had fallen over the apartment. Claire's eyes darted around, noticing for the first time how cold the place felt, like someone had left a window open, though none were. The creak came again, this time from Jack's bedroom. David swallowed and stepped forward, phone flashlight trembling in his grip. The beam of light revealed the hallway's peeling wallpaper and a series of photos on the wall. Pictures of Jack and his friends from happier days. Sam paused to look. There was a photo of them all at the carnival last summer, smiling wide. Now it felt like a lifetime ago. They reached the bedroom door. It stood ajar, revealing an unmade bed and a closet door slightly open. Nothing looked obviously disturbed, but an uneasy feeling hung in the air. The moonlight spilling through the window cast strange shadows on the floor, making it look as though black shapes slithered across the carpet. Claire pointed a shaky finger at the closet. "Did you see that?" she whispered. David swept the flashlight beam over the closet door. At first, nothing. Then, a sudden shimmer, like something reflective peeking through the narrow gap. Sam stepped closer, gripping the doorknob. His heart thundered in his chest. Slowly, he pulled the door open. Clothes, boxes, old sneakers, everything seemed in its place. Then Claire noticed a piece of paper lying on top of a stack of jackets. She gingerly picked it up. It was one of Jack's sketches. He was always drawing strange, twisted shapes in his notebooks. This one was worse. A silhouette of a tall figure, limbs too long, fingers too thin, standing by Jack's window. Beneath it were scribbled words. "It moves when I blink." A sudden crash made them all jump. In the reflection of the bedroom mirror, they saw something dart past the open bedroom door. Something too large, too fast to be just a shadow. Sam rushed to the doorway, shining the flashlight into the living room. Nothing was there, except a single, wet footprint on the floor. The shape of the foot was wrong, longer, with far too many toes. Sam's heart pounded as he knelt beside the bizarre footprint, the flashlight jittering in his grasp. Claire and David stood close behind, every nerve on edge. The moist mark glistened under the wavering light, its elongated shape boasting far too many toes. 5, 6, 7. Was that an eighth? It was as though someone had pressed a twisted hand into the floor rather than a foot. Claire choked back a whimper. What did Jack get himself into? She whispered, pressing her back against the wall. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows with a force that seemed unnaturally strong for a typical night. The old pipes in Jack's apartment creaked and groaned, as though the building itself had begun to stir in response to the presence of something alien and unwelcome. Sam took a deep breath. "We should call the police," he said at last, voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We can't handle this on our own." But when he grabbed his phone to dial, the screen flickered to static and went black. David tried his own phone. Same result. Claire's phone wouldn't even turn on. A sense of dread settled over them, heavy as a wet blanket. They backed away from the footprint, seeking refuge in the living room. A lamp flickered in the corner, casting unsteady light across the floor. David tripped over an overturned chair, something they hadn't noticed in their earlier frantic search. On the chair's seat was another sketch, pinned there by a rusted nail, as if left for them to find. This one was a series of disconnected symbols carved in black pin, ringed by the words, "It wants to come through. It needs an opening." Claire, hands shaking, picked up the paper. Jack wrote this, but why nail it to the chair? Her voice caught. He must have been desperate to warn us. In the corner of the page, they found fresh droplets of water, still slick to the touch. The same dampness that had tracked the unearthly footprint across the apartment. A sudden crash from the hallway made them all jump. The floor lamp hissed and died, plunging the living room into darkness. Through the gloom, they heard a new noise, something shifting, almost slithering, along the walls. It moved behind the plaster, a muffled scraping like nails clawing through layers of old paint. Panicking, David fumbled for the flashlight. Its narrow beam cut across the living room walls. For a moment, they saw nothing, until the beam froze on a hairline fracture snaking upward along the plaster. Thin wisps of dust trickled out, and the cracks seemed to move, as though being pushed from the other side. Claire stepped forward, mouth dry. She could almost swear she heard whispering from within the wall, too faint to be words, more like a vibrating hum of countless tiny voices. "Guys," she murmured, her voice quivering, "I think something's in there." The crack spread further, branching into smaller veins. Sam tugged Claire's arm, afraid the wall might give way. But they all remained transfixed, drawn, in spite of their terror, to the quiet, steady pulsing that came from behind the plaster. It was like a heartbeat, slow and rhythmic, each thud vibrating through their feet. Suddenly, the hum burst into a piercing screech. The wall shuddered, and a cascade of debris rained onto the floor. Dust filled the air, choking them as they stumbled back. In the swirl of broken plaster, a shape lurked, a faint, inky silhouette that slithered back into the darkness before any of them could register its form. David coughed, wiping plaster from his eyes. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted. But as they scrambled to the front door, they found it stuck, the handle refusing to budge no matter how hard they pulled. The only thing they could do was stare helplessly at the fractured wall. A ragged breath behind them made them whirl around. There was no one there, only the swirling dust in the pale beam of the flashlight. Yet in that dust, drifting through the air, they thought they saw a figure, long-limbed, impossibly tall, watching them. And in the silence that followed, they felt it, a gaze, unwavering, filled with a hunger that defied comprehension. A thunderous boom echoed throughout the apartment as something heavy slammed against the far wall. Plaster dust rained down, obscuring the air in a filthy haze. Claire let out a sharp cry, pressing herself against Sam for support. David stood frozen, flashlight shaking in his hand, its narrow beam weaving frantic shapes across the wreckage. They had to leave. Every instinct screamed it, but the front door refused to budge. Even the windows, which they'd rushed toward in desperation, felt unyielding, as though a supernatural force had locked them tight. The entire apartment seemed to have shifted, becoming something more like a living thing than a place of refuge. Every creak, every whisper, felt charged with malice. "Look," David hissed, pointing toward the hallway that led back to Jack's bedroom. A faint glow flickered there, pulsing like a dying light bulb. They hadn't left any lights on. There hadn't been power in this building for nearly an hour. Yet something cast those shifting shadows across the walls, extending and retracting like slender tendrils. Huddled together, they moved toward that eerie glow. Each step felt like walking through a nightmare of rustling sheets and drifting debris. Their hearts throbbed with equal parts terror and determination. Jack was still missing. Maybe he was close, trapped behind some unseen barrier, or taken somewhere none of them could comprehend. As they crept past the living room, the scratched wallpaper seemed to ripple. Claire thought she saw silhouettes writhing within the torn patterns, shapes that vanished when she tried to focus on them. The hush was broken only by their ragged breathing. Even the wind outside had stopped howling. Now there was only the unsteady pulse of that glow, throbbing like a sick heartbeat somewhere up ahead. Suddenly, they found themselves at the threshold of Jack's bedroom again. This time, the door was wide open, as if inviting them in. A lamp they swore had been broken just minutes ago now flickered in the corner, casting sputtering light across the bed. The closet door hung ajar, and the gloom inside beckoned. On the desk, they noticed pages spread out, scattered across the surface as though someone had rummaged through them. Sam lifted one of the sheets with trembling hands. It was Jack's handwriting, entries scrawled in thick black pen, words overlapping in desperate agitation. I hear it inside the walls. It's closer every night. Something wants to come through. I keep seeing it in my dreams. I shouldn't have listened. Sam's eyes darted across the entries, searching for any clue as to what Jack might have discovered or summoned. Each sentence felt more frantic than the last, dissolving into scribbles and claw-like etchings. One phrase leapt out at him, circled so fiercely that the ink had torn the page. There is a gateway beyond fear. What gateway? Claire whispered, pressing her fingers against her lips. What did he do? Her voice cracked with the strain of suppressed panic. David turned to the closet. Something about it tugged at his attention, an uneasy pull he couldn't quite articulate. He shoved aside clothes on their hangers and dug behind boxes of old sketches, random trinkets, empty notebooks. Finally, his hand closed on a leather-bound journal, half hidden beneath a dusty jacket. Its cover bore a single symbol, a circle crossed by jagged lines, reminiscent of an insect's leg or a twisted star. He opened it. More of Jack's drawings spilled out, gnarled shapes, robed figures, monstrous silhouettes. There were even old photographs stapled to some pages. Abandoned churches, mossy gravestones, catacombs. In the margins, scrawled notes described a ritual, something about chanting words by candlelight, letting one's mind wander between worlds. Pieces of it were too smeared with ink to read, but the implication was horrifying. Jack had been dabbling in practices older and darker than any of them had imagined. A deep groan reverberated through the walls, so loud it rattled the floor. The closet door jerked in David's hand, nearly pinching his fingers. Everyone recoiled, hearts hammering, as a sudden gust of frigid air swept through the bedroom. It smelled of rotting leaves and stagnant water. "Back away," Sam shouted, grabbing the journal and stumbling toward the hallway. The bedroom lamp winked out, plunging them into near-total darkness. The only light now was David's flickering flashlight, a trembling beacon in a sea of shadows. Then they unmistakably heard a voice, low and moist, like a gargle, syllables that did not belong to any human tongue. It resonated in the floor, the walls, the air around them, sucking every ounce of warmth from the apartment. Claire let out a strangled scream. Through a jagged crack in the bedroom wall, she saw something move. Its movements were irregular, like a puppet with tangled strings. Eyes flickered dimly in the darkness, several, or maybe just one, constantly changing position. And a hand, or something like it, slipped out. Long, outstretched fingers pressed against the broken plaster, feeling their way into their world. Before they could see more, Sam pulled Claire away, adrenaline roaring in his ears. David stumbled over a fallen chair, but scrambled to his feet, clutching the flashlight so tightly his knuckles turned white. They ran out into the hallway, not daring to look back at the abomination squeezing through the wall. The last thing they saw before they ran out of the bedroom was a single eye, so big it seemed to fill a hole in the plaster. It blinked once, slowly, watching them with a mind that filled their bones with icy terror. And then it was gone, dissolving into darkness. Sam, Claire, and David took their final step into the damp basement of the apartment, following the semi-legible instructions scribbled in Jack's diary. The floor was covered with faded chalk lines and cryptic symbols, a desperate, last-ditch effort Jack had started but never finished. In the dim, flickering light of a single light bulb, They worked desperately to re-establish the circle and complete the spell Jack never finished. Before they could complete the ritual, a grotesque figure appeared from behind a cluster of rusty pipes. It wriggled on its outstretched limbs, its eyes glittering with unearthly hunger. David tried to restrain it with a piece of jagged pipe while Sam and Claire recited the mysterious words, voice after trembling voice. Each syllable echoed in the darkness, as if the basement itself was resisting what they were doing. The chalk circle began to glow with a cold bluish light. Then, through the swirling black tear, they saw Jack, frozen in some incomprehensible space, his eyes wide with fear. He was silently begging for rescue, but in a burst of terrifying power, the gate slammed shut, dragging the monster and Jack into the darkness. For a long moment, no one moved. A suffocating silence reigned in the room. When they finally climbed the stairs to the basement, the door opened and they stepped out into the night. As they stood on the sidewalk, shivering under the streetlights, they realized that Jack was indeed gone. Although they had sealed the evil behind its walls, it was only a temporary victory. In the weeks that followed, none of them could shake the feeling that somewhere outside their world, something was still lurking, forever waiting to break through again.